Okay, I'll make it 6 o'clock. If we could possibly start, please. Apologies for absence. Thank you.
And Tom, our facts as well, he's not very well, so I asked him.
Yeah. And am I okay to add Naila Ibrahim as well?
Yeah, I think we said that. Thanks very much indeed. If we can go to item 2, urgent business. I've got one item of urgent business which I'd like to raise now and deal with now, and that is that I'd like to nominate a vice chairman for from now till the end of the municipal year, and I'll nominate Councillor Brownage. All those in favour? Right, thank you very much indeed. Good vote of confidence, you see. Yeah. Public question time. Have we got any questions?
No, Chair.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, did I miss that? I'm moving too fast, aren't I? Declarations of interest. Thank you. Any further declarations? No. Okay. If we can move on to the item 5, minutes of the previous meeting, which have been circulated. Has anybody got any questions on them?
I'll move them, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All agreed? Thanks very much indeed. If we move to item 6, which has been withdrawn, so we aren't dealing with that item today. If we could therefore move to item 7, and this is the land at Howard Street. I think somebody is going to speak on this. Possibly take your place, and I'll ask the officers to outline the application.
Yeah, committee. The first application up. This is an application for a residential block of apartments. It's a 3-storey block, as you can see, 14 one-bedroom apartments. The applicants being First Choice Homes. First Choice Investments. First Choice Investments. This is a location plan. A little bit confusing because it's on each side. So north is on the left-hand side of the picture. As you can see, on the right-hand side, leading through is Howard Street itself, which is obviously a cul-de-sac. There's a large property directly to the east of the site, and what isn't shown on this particular plan is that there is an area at a lower level, so there's a modern housing estate. Houses further to the north are well screened from the site, both by levels and by planting on that area. I don't know how clear members can see this because it's quite bright in the room. So again, this is Howard Street coming through. A couple of existing large properties on the street, another property on the other side. This is the site itself, which is a former allotment site that's fallen into disrepair and has been subject to fly tipping. Now here to the west of the site is the more modern residential development, which is at a lower level, and you'll see that relationship on some of the forthcoming slides. This is Howe Street itself. So this is the access road going into the site. The site's at the bottom there on the left-hand side. Now this is the layout of the site. So as say Howe Street, if you judge the plan, you're coming in from the bottom end. This is the site itself, Howe Street on the right. The building itself is one large 3-storey block with a single-storey section to the rear. Car parking provided at the front of the site, a couple of areas, and in an area at the back of the site with 10 spaces in total. These are the elevations of the site. As I say, it's a 3-storey building, which is not the immediate character of the area. But as you can see, if you look on the front elevation, it is set slightly down from the adjacent properties, so the overall roof heights tend to be more equivalent across the site, despite the upper level. Again, at the rear of the site, you've got that 3-storey. These are effectively through lounge kitchen areas to the apartments. These are kitchens on the back of the site. again, difficult to see, but there's showing the layout, as I say, they're effectively through lounge areas. Another picture, so this is the site looking back down towards the entrance from Haworth Street. This is again a bit bright, but should be able to just make about, so the site's in the foreground, and these are the houses at the back at the lower level across the site. And this is giving you that indication of the difference between the site level. So the main 3-storey block is in excess of 21 metres to the existing houses. Again, this is just another view. This is looking, again, shows you that difference in levels. This is looking from the block on the other side of Haworth Street towards the application site. So as I say, it's a three-storey block, 14 apartments, 10 car parking spaces are being provided within the site. It's a site that has had previous approval for residential developments. The principle of that type of use of the site has already been established. We had a small number of objections that were received, and they focused really on 2 issues. One was car parking issues along Haworth Street itself, and the second was whether the scale and the design of the building was appropriate to the area. In terms of the parking issues, as you'll see, the highways officer is satisfied with the level of parking. These are 1-bedroom apartments that are being proposed. In terms of the scale, again, from some of the visuals you could see, although it's a 3-storey building, it'll sit on the site, so it won't be conspicuously higher than some of the neighbouring properties, including the large building which faces the site. In terms of privacy, we haven't received the properties down at the lower level at the back of the site. They were all notified of the application, and we haven't received any letters of concern or objection from those residents. But we're satisfied that the separation distances are appropriate to maintain the amenity of those residents. And similarly, the distances, although it's up on the hill away from there, the overshadowing issues shouldn't be so severe that it would justify refusal of the application. So on that basis, and subject to the conditions in the report, it is recommended that the application be approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions in relation to the presentation? No? Okay, if I could ask Mr. Roberts to address the meeting on behalf of the applicant.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair and members, for allowing me this opportunity to speak tonight. I do not wish to add much further to the officer report and recommendation. The applicant has worked with the local planning authority throughout the process to deliver a scheme that is compliant with all relevant local and national planning policy. The proposed development provides an opportunity to deliver housing on an underutilised site in a sustainable location. It is therefore kindly requested that members permit this planning application for what is clearly sustainable development compliant with all relevant policy as set out in the report before you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Any questions of Mr. Roberts? No. Thank you. It's open for discussion and debate. Councillor.
I've no objections, Chairman, but I do worry that allotments that were here, that we're building on, when you think of in town, there's very few green spaces, and I wonder if we couldn't have brought them back as allotments and built somewhere else. I'm just worried about that.
I was thinking of a comment.
Yeah, I mean, there have been, I'm not sure exactly how many years since there were last in use of allotments, but it is quite some time, so it's not taking a site that is currently used for that purpose. Because it's not been used for some time, it's obviously, there's some antisocial behaviour issues associated with the site. So, whereas I totally agree, it would be great to do that. There's no obvious prospect at the moment of bringing it back for that purpose. But, and of course, that's counted against the provision of new housing in the area. Thank you.
Councillor Brownridge.
Sort of associated with that, is there amenity space for the future residents? A. And B, where are the dustbins, please?
Perhaps. So this is the site layout itself, as I say, our street on the front of the site. The amenity space is effectively in these areas around the outside of the site, and in fact the land falls away beyond this. So actually you've got, if you're out in these areas, you actually get some sense of openness around the site. The bin stores, it's condition. The bin storage areas appear to be in the rear of the building itself. There's actually areas within the site. If members were concerned about that, obviously we could seek further clarification on that.
Well, yes, I am concerned about that. Bins are an obsession of mine. I think we need to know, because if it's obviously going to be communal bins or whether it's going to be individual bins, we need to know that, because it makes a difference to the size and how accessible they are. In terms of the open space, I can see there's open parts of the site, but there's no mention of it in the report, and there's nothing in the conditions. Do we need to protect that open space for the future, make sure it's maintained to a decent level, or...?
This is a block of apartments. As things stand, they don't have any permitted development rights, so the area is clearly connected with that. There's not an area there that could be subsequently sold off or developed practically.
No, I wasn't thinking about it being redeveloped. You're just thinking of being neglected and not actually usable space, that whether we ought to, you know, whether there be some sort of management arrangement to actually look after it, because it is quite important that they do have somewhere external.
Again, it's not really an issue that we would be specifically able to control through the planning regulations. However, clearly the condition of the site, there are controls. Section 215, for instance, would provide some controls if the site fell into a state of disrepair. But it's not really appropriate for the planning system to be controlling how the site is actually managed itself. So I wouldn't consider that would be a condition we would recommend.
Well, I must beg to differ, because I think if we're saying we're creating a new residential development, we want to create a decent amenity for the people who are going to live there. And a 215 notice is a pretty blunt instrument, and you have to wait for it to have got into a terrible state before you can act. It's really, I'm talking about saying this is a development in its entirety, and we want it to stay in that usable way, so the residents have a decent quality of life in the future. So I don't say we're telling them how to do it. I don't mean it like that, but it needs to be written into the permission that it's an integral part of the development, it seems to me.
I'm not quite certain how we could impose a condition that would satisfy the tests on that, in terms of, clearly we can't impose a condition that says something like the site shall be kept in a kind of ordered condition, because clearly that wouldn't meet the necessary tests for precision. In terms of getting involved in the actual precise management, similarly, we could ask the applicant to provide, we could have a condition that requires them to put forward the details of the management scheme. The difficulty comes thereafter that the actual manner in which they maintain the site is not something we could micromanage legitimately through a planning condition, and that, as I say, is where the legislation comes in, that we could control the site if it is left in a less than, or in a condition where it's causing harm to amenity in the area, and that includes the residents of the site itself.
I entirely appreciate all that. I'm just thinking of the issues now coming up with, you know, parts of open space being declined to some of residents of development, which was never the intention when the application was granted. I know that doesn't apply here, but it's a for instance. So I'm just wondering, could the actual permission be granted for residential development with associated open space, or something? The actual decision notice describes what we're granting planning permission for. It would at least make it clear it's an integral part of the permission that we're granting.
Obviously, we would normally agree any amendments to the description of the application with the applicant, but I'm assuming that they would if necessary, they would have no problem with us, for instance, changing it, development 3-storey block, 14 one-bedroom apartments with associated open space and car parking. We have the car parking in there as well. There was a bit of lack of clarity on the waste storage. Similarly, there's no problem with us imposing a condition that requires the full details of that to be submitted.
Has anybody else got any comments? Could I suggest that we approve this subject to what's been discussed about waste disposal? Councillor Rosen? Thank you. Is that second? Second. Are we all in agreement? Thanks very much indeed. We then can move on to item 8, which is 1 to 5 Church Terrace. I don't know whether there's anybody contributing. Is it Mr. Roberts again? Mr. Mushtaq?
Who's doing the time for the speaker?
He,
You doing it?
yeah. If I can ask the officer to outline the application.
Thank you, Chair. So before you, this application is for the change of use of the first and second floor of a previous bank at 1 to 5 Church Terrace. The application is before you due to the applicant being a relative and of elected member. So the application is located within the town centre and also within the town centre conservation area, adjacent to listed buildings in and around the War Memorial, which I'm sure everyone has been and seen. As you can see from the plans here, the ground floor will be maintained in a C2 office use, so we maintain that commercial element at the ground floor within the town centre. However, the first and second floor will be converted into apartments, which you can see on the plans here. They're the existing and they're proposed. This is the main frontage, which will be unaltered, and there are no external alterations proposed. It is merely the internal arrangements that will be changed to facilitate the proposal. The proposal is recommended for approval by officers.
Has anybody got any questions of officer? No. Right, Mr. Mushtaq, if you'd like to say a few words.
Hello, sorry. Yeah, oops, right. I did a pre-op before I purchased the building, and I was originally thinking of doing the whole building as residential. Then I do work closely with the regeneration team because I've had a few properties in and around this area. So after speaking to people in Oldham Council, James Tolan it was, in the regeneration team, they ideally wanted some kind of commercial use. So I decided to go for like a business centre. The upper floors, originally we were thinking of doing offices as well. And then after getting a few commercial agents in, Breaking Nuttall and Alan Kirkham, they kind of strongly advised not to have commercial use on the upper floors and go for residential because it's very difficult to rent them basically. So I think there was the Parliament Cafe across the road, Breaking Nuttall, said it took them a year and they still couldn't rent the upper floors as offices. So that's the reason, that's a primary reason for going residential, and it's a good mix. Half of it's still the basement and the ground floor are going to be offices, and the upper two hopefully after they can be converted into apartments. Is that okay?
Anybody got any questions of Mr. Mushtaq? No? Sorry? Has anybody got any questions? No? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Can I just ask you, where's the access? Where will the access be for the apartments? I know that bit there, but...
Do you know where the yellow... Go back. I'll just point out. So basically, that's the access for the officers. Luckily, we've got another door there near the smoke yard. and that actually, the layout's quite good. It's got a staircase that goes to 2 sets of doors, and that's each flat basically.
So not through the property?
No, not that. Well, obviously it's part of the property,
Yeah.
but not through the offices. No,
Right.
nothing to do with the offices.
Right.
Total separate entrance and like a solid wall, so no access there.
Any further questions? Councillor Hume?
Thank you. So in terms of if there's a fire or anything like that, what's the process for that? Is there another exit? If obviously there's that one in, you said one there, but is there another exit for people if there's a fire?
Obviously it was the RBS previously, so they had offices to the above floors. The question was quite a good on the first one, because there was the access did go through the first door as well. There's a staircase that went up, but we've removed that. But the other door that I showed you takes you up to both levels. There's already metal staircase installed, because the bank and the offices that were using it, and they're quite solid. We've investigated that, so everything's there to get out of the building. Plus we've just put new sash windows in, all to regulation, so they open halfway up. So if there was an emergency of that sort, you'd get out through the windows as well, on all sides.
Thank you.
Cool.
Has anybody else got any questions or comments? Yes, Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. Bit close. I mean, this is a conservation area. You've got these flats here. I mean, it's not the intention in the future these have become HMO type places. You just want them as individual flats.
Yeah, the property is going to be 2 large flats. We would have tried to do more. Obviously, as a developer, you try and get as many as you can in, but because of the rear, the other buildings at the back, I think solicitors and so forth, we can't have any bedrooms at the back, so we could only fit 2 large flats in. But yeah, that's what they're going to be, two flats. We've got a similar flat above another one of our properties, and we've just got a family living there, so that's the plan.
Yes, Councillor. Councillor Brown.
Sorry, can I ask a question about amenity space then? Is there any amenity space? These are 2 large, possibly family houses. Is there any amenity space, private amenity space for them at all?
Well, it's a bit difficult because of where it's located to provide amenity space, but there's nothing really amenity-wise, I would say, in that sense.
So, supplementary question then, there's a condition on about waste disposal. I seem to be plugging a bit of an issue here. I don't know what's at the back because you can't really see at the back. So are you having communal bins? Is it going to be individual bins? Is there somewhere where the bins can actually be stored?
There's, if you go to the site, it's not that far obviously, but if you walk past the alleyway next to the site, and at the back there's bins for the smoke yard and all the other commercial properties, and a lot of them are large industrial style bins. So because they're just going to be two family homes, there's going to be the normal bins, and there's plenty of room there at the back. So there's going to be 2 sets of normal bins, so the recycling, brown, green and black. But if you go there, if you go past today, you'll see about 15 bins there already. So I don't think there's a lot of room in the alleyway basically, and it's secure as well because of the commercial units. So they've got like a code, and it's caged, so they're quite safe.
Councillors, indeed, aren't sorry, Councillor Hewitt.
There's this thing like a parking. Where are they going to park the cars?
There is obviously in areas like this, we've done developments before, but people tend to find places to park. Sometimes we might get lucky and have a family that use public transport. You're in the town centre, you've got the tram, you've got the buses, you've got everything that you need. So hopefully we'll find a couple of them type of families that love public transport and want to save our planet.
Is there any further comments at all? Anybody? No? Could I formally move approval? Thank you. Yes, Councillor Chairman.
Yeah, I mean, I thought we would move on to that when we finish, but yeah, I mean, a further comment would be, I mean, it's clear the applicant doesn't want to make this into an HMO, but could we have that as one of the terms in the, if it's approved that it couldn't be turned into an HMO, would that be possible?
Yes. There are two different types of HMO, and this one, each unit could be split into what's called a small HMO that would allow up to 6 people living together or living in the same unit. So each one could be split into a small HMO.
I think what's being asked is, could we actually inhibit that by putting a condition on?
Yes. We could put a condition on to remove permitted development rights to prevent that happening.
Well, that's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
So basically what we're saying now is that we move approval subject to that further condition.
We're not going to get shops and offices coming in the main street. We are where we are in the 21st century, and I think we're lucky that this building is going to be used, and we should bear that in mind, because ideally we would want shops and commercial in this area, but we're not going to get it because there's lots of spaces that are going to have to be thought of very carefully. So I think we're lucky that somebody's come along to develop this and only have 2 flats in such a large building. I think it really is a credit, and I think Oldham will show that this is the way forward. We're going to have to find uses for these buildings throughout the land, whatever we think of. And I think this is an excellent way of doing it, and I support it.
Is there any further comments? It has been moved and seconded, subject to a further condition that it can't be turned into an HMO. Are we happy to move to a vote?
Can I add something? No.
Well, no, we're just, you know, you're strictly allowed 3 minutes and not, okay, all those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay. If we can then move on to the next item, which is Edgem Farm. I think we've got, is it Mr. Rigby? Could I ask you to introduce the item?
Thank you, Chairman. The application before you is for the erection of a detached utility building at Edge End Farm at Whitebrook Lane, Greenfield. The application is before the committee because it was referred by Councillor Sheldon. As you can see from the location plan here, the application site is an isolated new dwelling in the Greenbelt located below the local landmark that is Pots and Pans. The dwelling is located here inside the area edged red there, and the building is to be positioned to the left here within the residential curtilage. All PD rights were removed for the property, and as such that's why a detached building like this requires planning permission. This is the site as it stands at the moment. They have 2 car parking spaces, and this is the access track that comes to it. And there is located here a container at the moment that is housing a quiet diesel power generator. That container is actually unauthorised. the building is to be positioned here. As you can see, it's got a rather large footprint, and it will provide a double garage, the storage of a diesel generator, and have a basement for the provision of water and solar panels on the roof. The elevations are as follows. As you can see, there's the double garage, and you can see the entrance is not obscured, not obscuring the position of the diesel generator. The subterranean level with the staircase there provides the 3 water tanks, and you can see there the cross section. This view is from slightly above the access track, and is showing the building on site, the house on site as it has been nearly completed, and obviously the associated vehicles as they're completing the development. This is a long range view from Tunstead Lane. This is the building here, and obviously given the position of the new building in the Greenbelt, it'll be located approximately in this location where the mouse is. So before you is an officer recommendation, again, of approval, because there was previously an application under delegated powers that was substantially the same, apart from the solar panels on the roof, that was refused. And the reason for refusal is the fact that the development represents inappropriate development within the Greenbelt. Inappropriate development is by definition harmful to the Greenbelt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. No justification or appropriate very special circumstances have been put forward to outweigh the harm on the Greenbelt, and as such the development is contrary to both our local plan and the national planning policies. Thank you very much.
Councillor Hudson.
I would like to ask the planning officer, I don't remember a situation that has arisen where so many hundreds of people have contacted me saying, this is ridiculous. If you had a vehicle in this area, it would stand out.
Could we, at this stage, could we just ask questions of the presentation?
Well, I'll ask him,
yeah.
Do you not think that if you stop this applicant from having a garage, it's already improved it, I think, to the residents? I mean, I've spotted that rundown place for years, and I've prayed that somebody would come along, and somebody has come along and sympathetically done it. Would you say that a vehicle stuck out there outside would be worse than a garage vehicle? That's what I'm asking, Chairman.
So in answer to the question, obviously the building has been replaced, as you are right. Obviously the original ruin was brought down by the applicant, and they had to come back for planning permission, again against planning policy, and the committee, against officer recommendation, approved it subject to conditions removing all PD rights, because any form of additional buildings on the landscape within the Greenbelt are highly visible. As a local resident, as a local councillor and a resident of Saddleworth, I'm sure that you know that building.
All that from Anna Lucet before you, and I disagree with her.
I'm still answering your question. Sorry. So, I am saying that it is highly visible, and as such, it has an impact on the openness in the Greenbelt, contrary to policy. And in relation to your question, sorry, a car there, in comparison to the structure that is being proposed and the size and scale of it, is vastly different. And obviously, that is. Cars and vehicles aren't permanent structures. We're talking about a large permanent structure in the Greenbelt that is against both local and national policy. So it's quite clear that it has a greater impact on the openness of the Greenbelt.
Councillor Gloucester.
I'm interested in the water tanks, because I'm assuming that they're on well water in this property due to its location. Would I be right in that?
The application states that it is currently provided from spring water, yes, that's correct.
So in terms of the storage of the water, what do they do currently?
Part of the original application, there was no provision of that. I was looking at the previous application they've had, which you can see in the planning history, and there's been no provisions made for that as far as I can tell. I think the initial intentions looking at the report was that they were going to have facilities in terms of like power and water brought to them. However, the distance in terms of its isolated nature is, as it's stated, there's no supporting information for that, but said it's not financially viable.
Okay, my concern is that from experience, I know it happens. We used to have a well, and without storing water for quite a large part of the winter, your well pump freezes up and you don't have access to any water. So I do see the need for this on a personal level. I can understand the application.
Okay. Could we go on and ask Mr. Rigby to contribute? You have 3 minutes, Mr. Rigby.
Edge End is possibly the most isolated house in the area. It is 1/3 of a mile from the nearest tarmac road. We live completely off-grid. We have no main utility services whatsoever. In order to achieve this, essential equipment's required. We just can't do without it. The major items are a large generator, a large fuel tank for it, some water tanks, and we need some snow movement equipment. All these items are absolute necessities. When it snows, we get 10-foot drifts, and when the moor was on fire this year, it was a bit frightening when we only had 50 gallons of water. This low-level building within our curtilage has been specifically designed to hide all these items and others besides. Sorry. All these and made to blend in with its surroundings due to the fact that it's half buried underground and constructed in local reclaimed stone. We've received a fantastic response to our sympathetic restoration of Edge End by local people, and it goes without saying that if your members were able to pass this building, the same exacting standards would apply. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Has anybody got any questions of Mr. Rigby? Yeah, Councillor Hewitt.
Actually didn't realise that you live totally off the grid, and in this day and age that is quite commendable with the planet warming and the climate change and everything. Also, the equipment that you just described, the snow moving equipment and your generator and your water pump, I can only assume, because I've got no local or professional knowledge, is it expensive equipment?
Yeah, it's there's 17 grand in the generator, in everything it takes to produce electricity. There's 17 grand there.
Councillor Jakes.
I assume that you knew when you bought the property that it was off-grid and that you may have these problems. I'm just really curious as to why this isn't, you didn't think of this before you got to this point.
That's a good point. But I think when you buy a place like that, you've just got to take a leap of faith. It's been empty since 1957. It's a beautiful spot, and yeah, there's been mountains of problems, and we've just gone on a policy of we've just got to deal with the problems and overcome them as we come, and that's what like now the wind and rain are coming through. It's blowing it that hard. It's actually coming through the stone. It's a problem. We've dealt with it, and that's if you want to live in somewhere spectacular like that, that's what you've got to do.
Councillor Actor.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the equipment that you've got there, the generator and the other equipment that you mentioned, where are you keeping it at the moment?
Well, at the moment, the generator's in the generator shed, in a blue shed. The diesel storage is at the side of it, and the snow moving equipment's at the side of that.
Is that the blue shed that you pointed to? Right, okay. So is that the shed that's there without planning permission at the moment? And it's visible? Right.
Right. No more further questions. Have you got questions of Mr. Rigby?
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, was there anything previously on the site before you put the blue shed in place? Was there an outbuilding there or anything at all at any point, or what was kind of there before you put in the storage and yeah?
There has been various different buildings on the site. There was another lean-to at the back and some other things, but there wasn't much of it left. You know, there's been all sorts of buildings, but they've all fallen down. And then there was like half a building left with another one on the floor.
Councillor Gloucester. Sorry, did you want to come back, Councillor Ian?
Cheers. Thank you. So I suppose my sort of question is the scale of that needed? So does it need to be quite that size and quite that scale? Because obviously that seems, you know, made of stone, solar panels, those are the kind of positives as preferable to the blue plastic shed that you got at the moment. But I'm just wondering, does it need to be that prominent, that scale? And obviously the subterranean level, could that be expanded? Could it be further down, if that makes sense? Does it need to be quite so prominent?
What I would like to do, I'm unbelievably passionate about this, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to do it once, not have to come back again, and have enough room so that I don't want, I look up, I go for a walk every morning, I look up and I think, what can I do to make my place look fantastic forever? And I want to do it once and have enough room to put all my bits and bobs in, so that when you look up there, and it's quite low, so when that you look up there, you'll just see it. That's all you'll see. And I go to extreme lengths about this, you know.
Councillor Gloucester.
Yeah, just, you mentioned a container, which I'm assuming is a metal large shipping container that you're using, not a shed at the moment. Am I right or wrong?
That's correct. It's a metal ship. It's a 12-foot metal shipping container.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rigby. If you want to take your seats. Right. It's open for debate, and Councillor Brownridge.
So, is there any way that the scale of this could be reduced to make it acceptable? I mean, I know it's always going to be contrary to policy, isn't it? Because it's in the green belt. I take it from those long distances is incredibly prominent, so you have got an issue. Arguably, cars parked outside impact on the openness of the green belt as well. So is there any way that we can come to a compromise that obviously we won't give Mr. Rigby everything he wants, because that's too big according to your submission? Is there any way it could be put in a different place, made smaller, dug deeper down, as Councillor Hume suggested, that we could provide the services to actually make this house habitable? Because it sounds like it's not actually going to be habitable unless we give them something. So is there a way, is there a compromise available to us?
So in relation to the habitability of the house, obviously they are on site now. As they said, he walks every morning from his property, and you can see it, he sees long distance views himself. So there are ways in which you can do that. However, they say in their application that it's not financially viable. The cost is too great, I guess, for them to put in the utilities they need. But obviously it's a statement inside the application, and that's all I've read. I've not had any additional information in relation to that. In relation to, as you've said there, a new building in the Greenbelt by definition is inappropriate. So you are right in saying that. And obviously as officers we have to go with the policy and make our recommendation. However, if councillors were minded to think to make it habitable he had to have something, then maybe with you asking us, we could go away and ask them to look at a smaller scaled building or one that is further into the ground. But obviously it would be for them to provide that scheme to us.
Yeah, I suppose I was asking, is it worth going down that route? Because obviously if at the end of the day the view is that any development's going to be unacceptable in greenbelt terms, it's not fair to even pose that, and as a committee we have to make a decision on this. If we have reservations about its scale, and clearly there are policy objections to its scale, I suppose the question I'm asking is there anything realistic that would deliver the generation and water storage, perhaps not cars, I don't know, perhaps we could live with the car staying outside, I don't know. But whether that's that discussion, would it be pragmatic and practical, or is it going to be just it's a total no? I think that's the question I'm asking.
I think if you take it back to how you should be assessing these applications, you've clearly heard the history. This is a replacement dwelling. You were concerned when you agreed to the replacement dwelling enough to take away permitted development rights to avoid large scale or any type of buildings growing within the curtilage. With this being a green belt location, it is up to the applicant to put forward a case to justify what special circumstances there are to justify the development. Now, I would have to say that what's been put forward doesn't meet that test. That's not to say that if a smaller scheme was put forward with a more precise justification, that we would, that we may be in a position to support it. But I think where we are now, we can't give you or him that comfort that we will be able to. I think as it stands, it's unacceptable. I mean, the moment you've got a 12-foot shed there that's unauthorised, that is visible. What's been talked about is something that's an awful lot bigger. It's 26 foot long by 20 foot wide and 12 foot high. So in terms of what's there now compared to what's going there, it's going to be, well, look at it in comparison to the house. Bring up the layout plan. And if you look at the water tanks, so you can see there, it's half the size of the house roughly, maybe between a third and a half. It's a fair chunk of development. And we've heard the tale about how the water tanks are needed. Well, that sounds quite a logical reason for having water tanks. But what I don't know is how much water would someone need to store? And the 3 tanks that are proposed, is that enough, more than enough? I don't know. And the water tanks are actually underground. So we might be in a position to say, okay, well, we can agree the underground water tanks because they don't necessarily affect the openness of the green belt. But on top of that water tank, if you go to the layout plan, the garage plan, you've got a large garage, and within that garage there is a small area where the diesel generator is. So I don't think it's for us to negotiate here today or to give you that confidence here today. What I think is apparent is we're asking you to support the recommendation, and I think if this one is refused, it's setting down a marker that there is a test to be met. And then I think it's for the applicant to come back, if he wants to, with revised proposals with a better justification that brings it back to the essentials. And if it's an essential scheme justified by a case, and we are convinced the very special circumstances arise, then we might be in a position to recommend approval.
Councillor Hudson.
Notice that from the consultees, including the highway engineer, none of them have any objections to this. And if you'd lived like me all your life in this area, you would know that the buildings before that crumbled, that were there. I mean, one family had 7 children brought up at Edge End. So it hasn't been unknown for people to come and go. And a lot of people would say that, is it common sense to replace this in the Greenbelt. Now, I know what you're saying, and I do respect the Greenbelt very much, and I have every faith in the officers to make the Metropolitan Borough a Greenbelt issue. But I think you've got to realise that officers come and go, and some of us stay a long time, and they've known what it's been like. And I think, Chairman, I will move that this be accepted, because I think it's accepted by 90% of the people, whatever party they voted for in the local election.
I think that to some degree, Councillor Hudson, there was a bit of unfairness in that, in the sense that the officers are presenting exactly what's the policy of this council and what is the policy nationally in regard to Greenbelt. Councillor Gloucester.
What happens if we go against policy? What consequences are there in ultimate actual action?
This application is contrary to policy. So under the regulations, it would have to be advertised as a departure from the development plan. There are various stages, and if it's a major departure from the development plan, then we would have to notify the Secretary of State of the intent of the authority to issue permission. I don't think we're at that point. I think it's below that point. So I think this is within your discretion to deal with, but but the reason you have that discretion is because as an authority you are entrusted with the power to protect the greenbelt and protect the landscape, and that's what we're asking you to do. While I'm talking, I'd just like to pick up just one small point. The point about highways was made, and I think it's worth pointing out that we're not being draconian here. We're not being punitive. There is a highway safety issue. There is a lack of visibility, and if you look at what the Highway Authority comments have said, is that it doesn't meet the standards, but because of the isolated rural location, the likelihood of danger is one that we can live with. So we've erred on the side of being reasonable there, and we aren't suggesting there be, yes, we're not suggesting that we refuse it on highway grounds, but I think it just needs pointing out that that we're not simply just throwing the kitchen sink at this. We have taken, we are cognizant of the location when assessing this.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to propose we move that for a deferral and ask the applicant to come back with a revised plan that might be acceptable, like the planning officer said, where they may be looking at the building instead of being imposing at the front, maybe rear of the existing house.
Shall I respond?
Thank you. What I would recommend is that you simply determine the application as it stands. There is a provision within the fees regulations that within 12 months a free go to a reapplication can be made, and as this is going to require a complete redraw and a new case, I think it would be cleaner and better for us to just deal with this application and for a new application to be submitted.
They may have already had that.
Sorry?
They may have already had that. This is the second application.
Can I just check? Sorry.
Councillor Brownree, did you?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think on having listened to this, I think I would like to move the recommendation as written. I think the provision is in the policy that various special circumstances can be advanced to justify an exception to Greenbelt policy. So we have there is the freedom there, but the onus is on the applicant to actually justify that exception. Now, clearly that justification hasn't been presented in a way that's acceptable to policy. And I think the danger is if we start determining applications like this on a one-by-one basis, we then get no consistency, and it's going to be increasingly hard. We know that the Greenbelt's under pressure, so it seems to me that we need to have a very consistent approach to Greenbelt in order to not create problems for ourselves further down the line. And the whole point about the discussion about the GMSF is we're talking about taking land out of the greenbelt so that it can be developed, not developing land in the greenbelt. It won't be in the greenbelt if the GMSF is adopted. So I think it is important that we actually stick to the national and local policies on this. This clearly doesn't provide an exception that can be justified. So I'd like to move the recommendation.
Just to clarify what was said a second ago, this application is the second application, which was a free go, and so they've already been refused under delegated powers by officers for the exact same position, the exact same size of building. So they understand officers' position in terms of it being inappropriate development, and the only difference is the fact that they've put it back in with solar panels under a free go, and then it has been referred to the planning committee for determination.
Councillor Gloucester and then Councillor Hudson.
On that point.
Councillor Gloucester first and then Councillor.
I actually want to second Councillor Hudson's approval, simply because I live in a location like this and I totally understand the difficulties these properties face. And I know that probably nobody else does. But to keep people in these buildings and them not falling derelict, and you can look all over Saddleworth and see hundreds of derelict properties, this type of development needs to take place to make them habitable.
Councillor Hudson.
I would say I agree with Councillor Bramridge, but unfortunately this committee haven't a good record when it's come to delegated powers. When it's come to the committee, they've decided one thing. This building would never have been maintained and improved had it been up to the officers. I recently had a list from planning saying they want more delegated powers. Well, I'll tell you what, there's 4 items on here tonight, 3 really. And if we have less, the people will turn out less to vote, because officers come and go and they don't know the area like councillors do. And I think, Chairman, we do need a level playing field, but if we build 300 houses in Groton and we don't let this man retrieve this building, then how is that a level playing field? I do not know.
I think that as well that you have to bear in mind that there was a local input by Saddleworth Parish Council that recommended refusal of this. Is there? Sorry. Well, some of us might. I don't know whether you don't or not. I don't know, but Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. There's history here. The fella's had a go at it. He's come back with this proposal. He's building property on greenbelt land. I'm really surprised about the Liberals and Conservatives complaining about that, because they're always saying about not building on greenbelt land. It's not for the greater good. It's for, whereas when you're building other developments, it is. That's the difference. And personally, I'd refuse this.
Right. Is there anybody else want to contribute? Okay. We've got a proposal to approve, which has been seconded. So if we could move to that vote, and I would ask committee to bear in mind that this could set significant problems in future if we do actually approve this. So I'll take those in favour of approval first. 4. Those against? Right. So the decision is that this is refused. Sorry, I'll sorry. I'll take.
What's happened is
we've voted against the sector. All right. I will formally move that we refuse this application.
Well, it's already been moved.
I've seconded. All those in favour?
Of refusal.
Of refusal. Those against? 4. So the decision is that this application is refused. Okay, we could go forward to item 11, which is a report on a number of appeals. I don't know whether anybody's got any comments on them.
Move we receive it, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay. Are we all agreed? Thank you.